Hello everyone, my name is Dave Liptak, and for my research project, I investigated people with disabilities in rural areas. Now for my project, I wanted to highlight some points between more developed countries and less developed countries, as well as what are some of the consequences of not having a universal healthcare system. As we all know, here in the United States, that's been a hot topic recently. So rural areas, a lot of these places, they're harder to reach, and services as a result then are less accessible for people with disabilities. A poor infrastructure will also make life for a disabled person more difficult in a less developed community. For example, many less developed countries do not have sophisticated paved roads or sidewalk systems. Rural areas are significant because proportionally people with disabilities dwell in these areas more so than urban or metropolitan areas. This has been an overlying theme for this entire project that rural areas proportionately have higher rates of people with disabilities than urban areas. Some reasons why this might be: maybe the medical resources, they're not as good. Um, Maybe the schools aren't as good. Maybe people come up as having developmental delays when really the school resources aren't as good to begin with. Some other explanations could be living in rural areas. The jobs, they're more physical, laborious. The chance of acquiring a disability could be much greater in a lot of these hands-on jobs. Now, issues that also might come up regarding transportation or lack of funding. This was interesting that not always lack of funding, not always this lack of funding can affect less developed countries. Scotland, for example, after the 2008 economic recession, it was a global economic recession. It didn't just affect the United States. Everyone around the world was affected. Um, Scotland's expenditures on people with disabilities decreased by 4.29% in from the year 2011 to 2015, and as a result of the global economic recession, this affected a lot of people with disabilities negatively. Their funding was cut, their resources were affected, and you can see how something like a global economic recession has an impact on them now. Lack of education, especially in rural areas and in less developed countries. 9 out of 10 people with disabilities in less developed countries do not go to school. Some reasons in my report, I have written the reasons from the globalpartnership.org that I have written are lack of understanding of their needs, lack of teacher training, unconducive learning environment, and lack of classroom support and learning resources. Um, and then I also wanted to add a note, like I was saying earlier, what also might be some reasons why people with disabilities in less developed countries are that much less likely to go to school. 9 out of 10. I think that it's worth saying that also because in these rural areas, again, there might not be such an emphasis on going to school. There will be more of an emphasis on learning learning jobs that don't require an education. Now, some parents of children with disabilities are actually choosing to homeschool as an alternative to public schooling. Again, like I said, the reasons um, schools don't understand schools don't understand people with disabilities. They might in rural areas they might not be as sophisticated in managing their needs, and people might choose to have their children homeschooled because they believe that they can get a better quality of education. Now, some cons of this too is that, of course, let's think about why do we have specialized training for teachers in the first place? You know, as great as it is for parents that want to teach their children with disabilities, these teachers, even though sometimes they might not be as trained as they should be, they're a lot of times more qualified for the jobs more so than their parents would be. They've gone to school, they got extensive training. They should have extensive training in the field. Reading my report, you guys will see that's not always the case, unfortunately. Moving on now, people with disabilities have historically been underrepresented involved in the workforce. The highlight of this problem and examining potential room for improvement. I explain in my report a lot of times comparing the social and medical model. Um, here in the United States, people with disabilities, as far as the year 2019, they only had a 19.3% involvement in the workforce. Um, historically, historically, the highlighted issue would be, well, people with disabilities are not as good workers and stuff. But as of recently, it's been highlighted that a lot of these jobs need changing to better accommodate people with disabilities needs. Um, Being excluded from the workforce has in past and still to this day made it so people with disabilities have to rely on family members or governmental subsidies. I have here about the risking losing their benefits. That's a big problem here in the United States. Many people with disabilities also become successful business owners as a result of not being included by the workforce or employers. You know, if employers aren't willing to, if employers aren't willing to go ahead and make, if employers aren't willing to go ahead and give them a chance, people with disabilities are out here doing it for themselves, and there's been a lot of documented instances where they're a successful small business owner. Um, I found in an article, one of the articles that I researched, a case study about Darren. He's a 20-year-old young man from Virginia. He has autism, and has he also has to wear an orthopedic leg brace because he has problems getting around. And he was fired from his job at a department drugstore because his boss said that he wasn't stocking the shelves fast enough and he couldn't keep up with the work fast enough. This then Darren was recruited by Project Search. That was a program at his high school. That was a program for after you graduated high school. Usually the program is for people still in high school. It was originated in 1996, by the way. Well, anyways, Darren is 20 years old, and under Project Search, he was doing an internship at a hospital, which was 27 miles away. The article noted that it was 27 miles each trip for his parents to drive because it was the only project of such that would accommodate needs for people like Darren. That was the closest, and it would make more sense to have more of these, then people wouldn't have to travel so far. Um, Anyways, well, Darren was very successful in his internship. The kind of work that they had him doing was preparing hospital rooms and cleaning them after a patient would stay. And Darren's attendance was spectacular, and his participation in the project shows that when people with disabilities are given the opportunity, a lot of times their achievements are just extraordinary. Okay, now moving on, I want to talk about disability and the attached stigma. In a lot of less developed countries, even developed countries, historically, there has been a lot of stigma attached with people with disabilities. From a survey of 400 people in the West African country, Ghana, 86.5% of people believe that people with disabilities should not be excluded from living activities, yet almost three-quarters of the people in the same survey believe that pregnant people with disabilities were not capable of going through childbirth without having any major complications or risks. Now, this is kind of a paradox in the survey where people will say that they should be included in life activities, but then deny them the privilege of childbirth. Well, see, that's the thing. I just said it's a privilege. It's not a privilege. It's a human right. By saying a person with a disability does not have the right to have children, that is violating their human rights. I just want to make a side note. I myself am a father, and it was a life changing experience. Huge impact on me having a kid. I couldn't imagine someone telling me, no, you can't have a child. It's modern day eugenics. It's wrong. Um, Also, there was a strong consensus about the relations between people with disabilities and non-disabled people, that non-disabled people just feel pity towards people with disabilities. People with disabilities are capable of living meaningful lives, so they are less inclined to set up or provide beneficiary resources for them. That's what they believe, and it prevents a lot of opportunities from happening for people with disabilities. Now, a lot of other cultures also traditionally believe that disability is a result of bewitchment or displeasing their higher power. That's another term for whoever they worship, also known as whoever their god is. This can interfere with people's acceptance of treatment of disability. This, by believing that a certain rehabilitation or therapy is not going to help someone because they have spiritual beliefs involved with their disability, people are then less inclined then to accept treatment. And in the medical field, these patients would then be labeled as incompetent for not wanting to follow a doctor's orders. Still prevalent to this day, many advise people with disabilities to not have children because of insistence that disability might be passed on to their child genetically. Another reason that a lot of non-disabled people were insisting that people with disabilities can't have children. And the sad thing is that even after being told this so much, people with disabilities will start to believe this too. A lot of people with disabilities believe they are not capable of having children, when in fact, in reality, they really are. But anyways, a result of not believing that they're able to have children is that they then feel less included in society. Inequality in resources and healthcare, socioeconomic status, that's what SES stands for, and wealth greatly influence one's ability to be able to cope with disability. Not to say anyone who is disabled's situation is easy for them, but having more resources can in many ways make disability less burdensome. People should strive towards making resources more readily accessible. It should be less burdensome for the majority of people with disabilities, which means it would then be less severe of a social problem. Um, I came across a really sad story when doing my research. It was about a young boy named Lin Hui. He was from a rural Chinese province, and when Lin Hui was born in the village hospital, just after he was a couple days old, he had a stroke, and as a result, he can't speak because of it. His family at the time, they couldn't afford to go to the hospital in Beijing, and to this day, they still are left with kind of feeling the guilt burden over themselves, knowing that if they could have afforded to go to the hospital, that maybe their son would be able to speak. They also say that his older brother, who moved away, they say that maybe it's sometimes a good thing, because when his older brother was around, he would abuse his younger brother, which really saddened to hear this, but kind of not surprised.